The moment her card declined, she didn't look confused. She looked at me, and her eyes went cold. Not hurt, not embarrassed, cold, like a door slamming shut behind a stranger. And when Marcus pushed back from my kitchen table, all 6 feet of him rising slowly like something rehearsed, and said, "You had absolutely no right to do that," I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not guilt. Something quieter than both of those. Recognition. Because in that moment, standing in my own kitchen, in the house I'd paid off with 31 years of work, I understood something I'd been too soft to face. They hadn't come here to visit me. They'd come to collect. Welcome to Big Sky Storytime. I hope you will like this story. Before listening to the story, I request you that if you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel and make the video a worthy one. Let's go to the story. Let me tell you about the person I used to be. Not the person I am now, because that woman is still finding her footing, but the woman I was for most of my adult life. The woman who believed that love meant giving until you had nothing left to give, and then finding a little more. My name is Carol. I'm 63 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio that I have not needed 4 bedrooms for in 11 years. Not since my daughter Natalie moved out to go to college. The extra rooms collect dust and silence, which I've come to learn is not the worst kind of company. I worked for 28 years as a hospital administrator. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing that makes people lean in at dinner parties. But it was steady and it was mine, and I was good at it. When my husband Dennis died of a sudden cardiac event 9 years ago, I was 54 years old, still employed, still standing, still the kind of woman who gets up at 5:30 in the morning, not because she has to, but because she simply doesn't know how to stop. Dennis left us a modest life insurance policy and a paid-down mortgage. I kept working 5 more years after his death, retired at 59 with a pension, some savings, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent her entire life making sure everyone around her had enough. Natalie was 22 when her father died. She was a junior at Ohio State, studying communications, and she fell apart in the quiet, leaky way that young people grieve. Not in huge, dramatic waves, but in a kind of slow erosion. She stopped calling home as much. Her grades slipped. She started spending money she didn't have on things I didn't ask about, and I started quietly covering her credit card payments without making a production of it, because that's what you do. That's what mothers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. I paid the balance on her student loans when she graduated, $38,000, because I didn't want her starting her life buried. I told myself Dennis would have done the same. I told myself it was an investment in her future, and it was. I believe that still. The problem was never the giving. The problem was what grew in the space that giving created. She met Marcus her first year out of school. He was handsome in a confident, almost aggressive way, the kind of man who assumes the restaurant check will be handled by someone else and has never been wrong. He had a nice car, nice watch, nice way of making you feel in the first 10 minutes of meeting him that you were in the presence of someone important. I wanted to like him. I tried hard to like him, and for a while I succeeded at a surface level. The dinners, the holidays, the way he shook hands and said, "Carol, you look wonderful," in a tone that was almost convincing. But there were small things. The way he talked about money, other people's money, like it was always available, always adjacent to him, just waiting to be redirected. The way he'd mention casually the cost of things they were doing, places they were going, as though narrating a lifestyle for an invisible audience. And the way Natalie changed around him, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, the way wood warps in humidity. She became less apologetic about asking me for things, less grateful, more efficient. I paid for a significant portion of their wedding, $32,000, which I told myself was a gift and tried not to catalog. I helped with their down payment on their townhouse in Dublin, $12,000, because Marcus's credit had some complications that were never fully explained to me. I covered Natalie's car repairs twice. I sent money when Marcus's commission checks were slow one quarter, then another. Each time there was a reason. Each time the reason made sense in isolation. It was Natalie who suggested I add her to my bank account. She framed it practically. She lived 40 minutes away, I was getting older. What if something happened and she needed to access funds quickly for my care? It sounded reasonable. It sounded loving, and I was 61 years old and newly retired, and perhaps lonelier than I was willing to admit, so the idea of being needed, even financially, felt like closeness. I added her to the account in April 2 years ago. I handed over a debit card to my own daughter and told myself it was trust. I should have known that trust and access are not the same thing.
The first few withdrawals I noticed were small enough to explain away. $40 here, $70 there, once $120 from a Target I'd never been to. I told myself Natalie had needed something. I told myself she would mention it next time we talked. She didn't, and I didn't ask, because asking felt like accusation, and accusing my daughter of something felt worse than losing the money. But then, the withdrawals started coming more regularly, and then more frequently. $200 on a Tuesday, $350 on a Saturday, an automatic payment I didn't recognize for a streaming service I didn't have, then another for a subscription box, then another that I couldn't trace at all, no matter how long I stared at the description. My monthly statement started looking like someone else's budget. Someone younger, someone spending casually, someone who did not have to think about whether their fixed income could absorb another surprise. I brought it up to Natalie in the gentlest way I could manage. I chose a Sunday when she'd called to chat, and I waited until we'd talked about the weather and her neighbor's new dog and a show she was watching before I said, almost as an aside, "Honey, I noticed a few charges on my account that I didn't recognize. Do you know what those might be?" The pause on the other end was brief but instructive. "Mom, I've used the card a couple of times. I thought that was fine." "Of course," I said. "I just wasn't sure what some of them were for." "I don't remember every single thing I buy. Is this really a big deal?" And just like that, the conversation had turned. Somehow, in the span of 15 seconds, I had become the difficult one. I let it go. I should not have let it go. Over the next 3 months, the withdrawals continued. They escalated. I started keeping a small notebook on my kitchen counter where I wrote down every transaction I didn't recognize: the date, the amount, the vendor. It felt paranoid. It felt like something a suspicious, small-minded woman would do. I did it anyway, because something in my gut, the same gut that had kept a household running for 3 decades, was telling me to pay attention. When I brought it up again, this time with more specificity, Natalie put me on speakerphone. I didn't know she'd done it until I heard Marcus's voice come in, smooth and certain. "Carol, I think there might be a misunderstanding. Natalie has access to that account. That means she can use it. That's what access means." "I understand what access means, Marcus." "Then I'm not sure what the issue is." "The issue is that I wasn't aware of some of these charges. I'd like to be asked." A pause. "Then you said she could use it." "I said she could have access in case of an emergency. We consider financial strain an emergency." I didn't have an answer for that. Not because he was right, but because the brazenness of it, the casual, unbothered brazenness, stole the words directly from my throat. Financial strain, as though my account was a community resource they were entitled to draw from when things felt tight, as though I had signed up to subsidize whatever gap existed between the life Marcus wanted and the life Marcus could actually afford. Natalie said nothing.
That was the part that hurt the most. She stayed silent while her husband spoke over her mother, and she let it happen. And when the call ended a few minutes later, she said, "I'll talk to you later, Mom," in the flat tone of someone who has already decided not to. The gaslighting got quieter and more refined after that. A few weeks later, when I mentioned my balance was lower than I'd expected, Natalie sighed and said, "Mom, you don't even spend that much. You're retired. What are you saving it for?" And the question landed with a kind of dull violence, because embedded in it was the implication that my money had already outlived its purpose, that its highest function was now to flow toward them. Once, she said, "After everything we do for you." And I sat with that phrase for days, trying to inventory what exactly they did for me. Marcus had mowed my lawn twice in 2 years. Natalie came for dinner maybe once a month, usually on the Sunday before a bill was due. The correlation was something I'd noticed but refused until that moment to name. There was an afternoon in November when I sat at my kitchen table with my bank statements spread out in front of me and totaled the withdrawals I didn't authorize over 14 months. The number was $11,240. I sat there for a long time looking at it. Then I made myself a cup of tea, washed the mug, dried it, put it away, and went to bed. I did not sleep.
The bank branch I use is a 12-minute drive from my house, past the grocery store and the elementary school where Natalie used to take swimming lessons in the summers. I've been a customer there for 22 years. The manager, a woman named Diane, has helped me through Dennis's death estate paperwork, a refinancing, and more than one awkward conversation I'd rather not relive. I drove there on a Thursday morning in January. I wore my good coat, not because the occasion required it, but because I needed to feel like myself, whoever that still was. I told Diane I wanted to remove an authorized user from my account, change my account number, and get a new debit card. I told her I'd like the new card sent to my home address and not to share any account information with anyone who called. Diane didn't ask questions. She had kind eyes and the practiced stillness of someone who has heard many versions of this particular story. She processed everything efficiently and handed me a temporary card across the desk, and for a moment I just held it in both hands like it was something delicate. My hands were shaking, slightly, the kind of trembling you can only see if you're looking for it. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 11 minutes before I drove home. Part of me was already composing the call I would make to Natalie, the explanation, the gentle framing, the reassurance that this wasn't about trust, it was about what? About what exactly? I had no clean language for it. There was no version of the conversation that didn't start with admitting I'd been watching, counting, cataloging. There was no way to explain the notebook without it sounding like evidence, which it was. So I said nothing. I went home. I made dinner. I watched television. And for 4 days, I sat with my decision the way you sit with a bruise, pressing on it occasionally to see if it still hurt, discovering every time that yes, it did, and yes, somehow that was fine. I still almost called her. There was a Wednesday night, 3 days after the bank visit, when Natalie texted me a photo of herself at a restaurant, smiling, beautiful, looking so much like the girl she used to be that I held my phone in the dark for 20 minutes debating whether I had overreacted, whether the money was worth this distance I was building, whether I was punishing my child for something that had really been my own failure of communication. I took the old debit card out of my wallet that night and cut it into 4 pieces with kitchen scissors. It was not a dramatic gesture. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a woman cleaning out a wound, doing something necessary that nonetheless stings. They came on a Saturday. I hadn't planned on company. I was in the backyard in my winter coat deadheading the last of the rose canes when I heard the car pull into the driveway.
And even before I turned around, something in the quality of the silence told me this wasn't a casual visit. Natalie's face was flushed in the way that means she'd been crying or arguing or both. Marcus was walking 2 steps ahead of her, which I would later understand was intentional. He wanted to arrive first, to frame the conversation before I had a chance to set my own terms. "Your card was declined," he said. Not hello, not mom, your card was declined. "Come inside," I said. "We tried to use the card yesterday and it was declined," he continued, following me through the back door into the kitchen. "And then we checked the account and Natalie's access is gone. Her name has been removed." "Sit down, Marcus." "I'd rather stand." So we stood, all 3 of us in my kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink and the tea kettle still warm from breakfast, and I waited. "You did this without telling her," Marcus said. "Without any conversation. You just went and did it." "I did." "That's..." He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has no humor in it. "That's unbelievable. After everything she does for you, after all the time she spends making sure you're okay, coming over here, checking on you." "Marcus." Natalie said his name quietly. He kept going. "Do you know how much we've been depending on that? You gave her access. That was a commitment. You can't just take it back because you feel like it one day." I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the floor. "Natalie," I said, "do you want to talk about this?" She looked up, and she said, and I have turned these words over so many times since that afternoon, examining them from every angle. She said, "Mom, that money helps us. We needed it. You have more than enough, and we needed it. And it felt like it was ours too." There it was, the thing I'd been circling for 2 years, finally in the open. Ours too. My retirement, my pension, the money I had worked every day for 28 years to accumulate. Ours too. Marcus jumped back in. "You live alone. What are you spending it on? The house is paid off. You don't travel. You don't..." "Marcus." Something in my voice made him stop. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe just stillness. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't crying. I was simply present in my own kitchen in a way I hadn't been for some time. I am going to say this once, and I need both of you to hear me clearly. I paused, not for effect, because I was choosing each word deliberately. What I gave you, the loans, the tuition, the wedding, the down payment, I gave those things out of love. There were no conditions, there was no invoice. I gave because I wanted to. But at some point, without my noticing, my giving became your assumption. And once that happened, I wasn't your mother anymore. I was a resource, and I'm not willing to be that. Silence. "You mistook my generosity for obligation," I said, "and that is the only thing I have to say about the account." Marcus looked at Natalie. Something passed between them, some calculation, some assessment of whether there was another angle to try. Then he said, with a coldness I hadn't heard from him before, "This is going to damage your relationship with your daughter. You know that." That was not my choice. They left 8 minutes later. I know because I looked at the clock when the door closed and then again when I finally sat down. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet, and I listened to the house settle around me, the small creaks and sighs of an old structure, familiar as breathing. And I thought, I should feel worse than this. I was waiting to collapse, and instead I just sat there, breathing steadily, in my own home, in my own quiet. The silence lasted 19 days. No calls, no texts. I sent Natalie a short message on day 5 that said only, "I love you. I'm here when you're ready." She read it, I could see the read receipt, and did not respond. My neighbor, Patricia, brought me soup on a Tuesday, the way neighbors used to do, and we sat at my table and I told her a version of the story. And she nodded in the slow, knowing way of a woman who has lived enough life to recognize this particular shape of grief. "You know what's funny," she said, "is that protecting yourself always feels selfish. until you remember no one else was going to do it. I thought about that for days. I want to be honest about the loneliness, because I think it would be dishonest to wrap this up too cleanly. There were evenings in those weeks that were genuinely hard. There is a particular ache to estrangement from a child. It doesn't matter how old they are, how wrong they've been, how clear you are in your own conscience. Something animal in you misses them. I kept her school photo on the refrigerator, the one from 4th grade, her hair in 2 uneven braids, grinning with a gap between her front teeth. I looked at that photo a lot. She called on day 19 at 7 in the evening. I let it ring twice before I picked up, not out of strategy, but because I needed a moment to collect myself. "Mom." Her voice was different, smaller. "Hi, sweetheart." A long pause. "I've been thinking." She didn't apologize, not that night. What she did was talk, more than she'd talked to me in 2 years, maybe longer. She talked about the pressure she'd been feeling, about Marcus's spending, which was apparently considerably more out of control than I'd understood, about the way she'd convinced herself that using my account wasn't really using it, that it was just family, just flow, just money moving where it was needed. She talked about how Marcus had told her I probably didn't even track my statements. She talked about how, when the card declined, he'd been angry at her, not me, as though she should have found a way to prevent it. That detail settled into me slowly, with a particular gravity. He'd been angry at her. "Natalie," I said carefully, "how often is he angry at you?" Another pause, longer. "We're going through some stuff," she said finally, which is how people who love someone describe things they're not ready to name. I didn't push. I just said, "I'm your mother. Whatever you need, as a mother, as someone who loves you, I'm here. That hasn't changed." But the account doesn't change. She started crying then, and I sat with her tears the way I'd sat with her childhood fevers, helpless in one sense, entirely present in another.
It's been 4 months since that Saturday in my kitchen. Natalie and Marcus are still together, though she's been over for dinner 3 times on her own, and she's mentioned a counselor, hers, not theirs, which I take as a hopeful sign. I don't ask about Marcus directly. I let her offer what she's ready to offer. She apologized on her 3rd solo visit. Not the performed kind of apology that's really just an explanation, a real one, the kind that costs something. She said she knew it had gone too far. She said she'd stopped asking herself what was right and started asking what was easier. She said she missed me, not the account, not the access, me, and that she wasn't sure when those 2 things had gotten blurred in her own mind, but they had, and she was sorry. I held her hand across my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had stood and told me I had no right. "I changed my bank account," I told her, "not to punish you. I changed it to remember who I was." I want to tell you that I have no regrets. That's not quite true. I regret that it took me as long as it did. I regret the notebook, not the keeping of it, but the necessity of it. The fact that my love for my child had become something I had to document in self-defense. I regret the years of quiet swallowing, the gentle questions left gentle when they should have been direct, the way I trained everyone around me to expect my softness by never showing them my edges. But I do not regret that Thursday morning in January. I do not regret Diane's kind eyes across the desk, or the temporary card in my shaking hands, or the 11 minutes in the parking lot before I drove home. I do not regret the 4 pieces of the old card in my kitchen trash. There is something that happens to a woman when she finally stops arranging herself to accommodate everyone else's comfort. It doesn't feel like power exactly. It feels quieter than that. It feels like walking into a room and recognizing the furniture, recognizing that this is your room. These are your things. You belong here. You don't have to earn it. I earned it. 31 years ago, I started earning it, and I have not stopped since.
My daughter knows my new account number. I gave it to her last month, on a Sunday, over coffee at my kitchen table. I gave it to her because she asked, and because I watched her face when she asked, the hesitation in it, the awareness of what she was requesting and why, and I saw my daughter again in that hesitation, not the efficient, redirected version, the real one, the one with the gap-toothed smile. She has not used it. I don't think she will, but if something real ever happens, something true, I'll be here. I'll always be here. Just not the way I was before. Never the way I was before. If you have ever loved someone so much that you made yourself smaller to fit into the shape of what they needed, I want you to know that your size was never the problem, and it is not too late. It is never too late to walk into a bank on a Thursday morning in your good coat with your shaking hands and take yourself back. If you like this story of mine, please leave a nice comment and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.